I always believed that horror can be at its best when it's misleading and misunderstood. Because horror isn't just monsters and jump scares, but the very moment when we are faced with the reality of an unexpected terror. That, my friends, is the best of horror. Today's story, we get to be introduced to a transfer student, Aziri Yuma, a charming and handsome young man for the curious girls, but a student who wasted no time on making quite the first impression when immediately seeking forgiveness to his fellow classmates. Such a random act that baffled his fellow students, as if Yuma was giving a strange performance or something. Many people thought he wasn't being serious, probably some kid with a terrible sense of humor. But when Kiko and several other students believed that there was sincerity within Yuma's apologies, let's just say that Yuma's pitiful antics quickly became the topic within the entire school. It didn't take long before Yuma became annoying amongst students and teachers alike. The strange student who literally apologized for everything. Some speculated that it was his strange way of being humble. Some believed that Yuma was just putting on a show, an unhealthy way to seek attention. If that was true, you can say that Yuma was definitely succeeding, just not in a positive way. Ranging from bumping into students within the hallways to accidentally dropping something when cleaning up the classroom, whatever it was, Yuma would immediately throw himself into this fit of apologies, trying to seek forgiveness for his actions. There were some who believed that Yuma was purposely doing this, just to give a performance. Either way, it didn't take long before Yuma's behavior caught the unwanting attention of a few students who enjoy stepping all over somebody who likes to look so pitiful. A few friends who found Yuma's behavior rather enjoyable when catching him alone within the school restroom, like kicking the boy's face into the piss-covered floor while watching him plead forgiveness, watching the weirdo forgive his actions when his head would be dunked into the toilet, and when watching Yuma walk out of the men's restroom drenched in toilet water after one of his pleasant encounters with Sanda and his gang. That was when a fellow classmate, Kiko, had finally introduced herself when taking pity on Yuma. She didn't buy into the conspiracy that revolved around Yuma, that his strange behavior was just a pathetic act to get attention. Maybe it was because of how she felt pity for the young man. She was actually convinced that Yuma's behavior was authentic, and trying to reach out to the poor boy, convincing him that his need to be forgiven for every single thing was doing nothing but getting him into bad situations, that he had to stop being so doleful. Unfortunately, Kiko's display of kindness and caring behavior would be responded with Yuma apologizing for his actions. With news breaking out of a strange disease spreading throughout certain areas of Japan, and a bizarre transfer student that has a weird way of getting attention, it seems like Kiko was dealing with her own set of problems. That after school, when Kiko walks home, she always finds herself being stalked by this little girl. Been showing up a few days ago, following her a couple blocks down the street before disappearing, and sometimes reappearing on the other side of the street, succeeding on giving Kiko that uncomfortable feeling of horror. But today, Kiko was having a hard time avoiding this little girl. And when it was becoming obvious that Kiko wasn't able to escape the girl, panic began to set in for Kiko when realizing that she had no other choice but to confront the child, demanding that the girl explain her actions, what she wanted, why she was doing this, and staring into those inhuman eyes, as if Kiko was staring into the presence of evil itself. That was when the girl gave off this sinister glee, drinking in Kiko's growing fear before the girl's appearance turned demonic, responding to Kiko by wanting to taste that delicious, sweet, soft brain of hers. And that was when Kiko began to flee in panic and as the demonic child chased after her, Kiko was so terrified that she was unaware of the fact that she was running in front of an oncoming truck until it was too late. It was a couple days until Kiko found herself waking up in the hospital. Thankfully, she suffered nothing more but a few injuries. You could say that she got lucky. When she finally awoke and was able to give her concerned parents an explanation as to why she would do something like charging herself into oncoming traffic, sharing her story of how a frightening little girl had been stalking and chasing her within the streets after school, Kiko did not expect that she would be visited by Yuma himself, but more shockingly, explained his visitation by wanting to give a sincere apology when claiming that he was the one responsible for this tragic accident. That little girl who's been chasing Kiko was actually Yuma's sister. Of course, Kiko's parents were furious with Yuma. Maybe it was because of how he kept apologizing profusely, pathetically begging them not to file a police report. But when they found out that Yuma's parents were deceased, meaning that he was living alone with the sister in some apartment complex downtown, eventually Kiko's parents began to take pity on the boy and started to forgive him and his sister's actions because of his attitude. Even Kiko began to find Yuma's daily visits soothing with his humble apologies. If Kiko didn't know any better, she was starting to grow this attraction for the strange young man. After the hospital, Kiko began to grow fond of Yuma and learn more about him, the reasons behind his strange behavior and his terrifying sister named Chizumi. As expected, both Yuma and Chizumi were the results of bad parenting, suffering from their strict discipline and abuse. And as a result, Yuma would torture small animals like insects, frogs, and snakes, a way to relieve his stress. Chizumi, however, was a story that Kiko found to be more of a fabrication when Yuma claimed that she was once a small, innocent, well-behaved child, until her personality was mysteriously warped, turning into this unhinged, demonic child who enjoys her share of terrifying pranks and scaring people within the streets. Yuma strongly believes that this was because of the snakes and animals he killed. They've possessed his sister in revenge, a snake's curse, which is why Yuma is convinced that he's fully responsible for his sister's mischievous and reckless behavior. As days went by, rumors began to spread around town of a little girl terrorizing people within the streets, mostly women and children, and how Yuma would find himself visiting the victim's house, begging and pleading forgiveness for the actions of his troubled sister. It was on one day when witnessing this herself, Yuma begging forgiveness from a couple who wasn't buying into Yuma's pitiful display. That was when Kiko would do something unexpected, irrational, by immediately throwing herself into this pitiful scene and seek forgiveness for the actions of Chizumi. This was obviously something that Yuma did not expect. Yuma was a bit lost for words, because of the fact that his apology act would be joined by another. Even though Kiko felt a bit embarrassed, for some reason she mysteriously felt enlightened, found the experience rather more uplifting. And when Kiko felt a sudden urge of confidence to do something else that most would find to be reckless, by suggesting that maybe it would be best if she and Chizumi were to meet, to try and reach out to the troubled girl, to be friends. Well, you could say that Yuma wasn't feeling comfortable with Kiko's positive behavior. Something about her actions was terrifying the young man. Reaching out to Chizumi is impossible, and Yuma may not know what Kiko was trying to accomplish, but there was no way he wanted any part of it, and that's when the troubled boy fled. Maybe it was because of how Kiko had grown onto Yuma's strange behavior. She simply displayed his foolish display of fear, completely ignoring all of the red flags. It's too bad how Kiko's moment of uplifting excitement was greater than her curiosity, with the inner feeling that there was a connection between Yuma's kneeling and his sister. And yet, Kiko still retained the goals of facing her inner fears and venture into the forbidden when reaching Yuma's apartment. When knocking on the door, obviously nobody answered, but Kiko was surprised to find the front door unlocked and decided to let herself into the forbidden. Maybe Kiko's intentions for setting foot into this home are good, but it was obvious that our curious girl wanted to know the secrets behind the strange boy and his terrifying sister. The apartment was literally empty. No furniture, no beds, no appliances, food, nothing that offered the slightest hint of comforts of normal living. It felt like the place was abandoned, or maybe that both Yuma and Chizumi were squatting, which was ridiculous, and yet something that made sense of all this. It was strange how there was literally nothing in this apartment besides the overwhelming stench filling the air. The scent of something rancid, as if something had died, kept hidden somewhere, rotting away. It was without notice Kiko would finally be introduced to Chizumi, the little demonic child who just couldn't resist scaring the foolish intruder, who would just waltz into this apartment with such noble intent. Little Chizumi, amused and entertained with Kiko's efforts of reaching out to a troubled child, wanting to be her friend. It's really not hard to be Chizumi's friend. All Kiko has to do is offer her sweet, delicious brain. Something for the little girl to suck on. Oh, how many people Yuma fooled with his apologies. How many would take pity on him or even seize the opportunity of kicking his face into the ground because of how pathetic he looked. And nobody knows that's how Yuma gets his kicks. The apologizing, it excites him. He thrives on seeking forgiveness from others. Kiko, of all people, should know, especially when she got on her knees earlier, getting that small ecstatic feeling. And now, here's Kiko, another foolish girl who thinks she has Chizumi's brother figured out. Probably heard one of his foolish stories of how he was abused as a child and tortured animals out of stress. No, that's not accurate. Yuma killed those animals as a ritual, sacrifices to a demon that dwelled in the nearby woods. And well, on one day, a demon had finally answered his call. That was when Yuma finally got his wish. Since that night, Yuma had never stopped apologizing. The boy with a strange obsession of wanting forgiveness from random strangers, desperately seeking attention with his pathetic act, clasping his hands together and gaining that inner experience of bliss when seeking forgiveness from the demon that lurked over his shoulder. Nobody knew. That day within the woods, Yuma was given a power from the apology demon. Nobody knew. Until it was too late. And as expected, Kiko, this foolish girl, refuses to believe the truth. Another love interest in denial. Chizumi has to give her brother credit on making a fool of everybody, but there's proof that Chizumi's brother isn't what he seems. And Chizumi just can't wait to show her new friend the true horror of the strange boy who seeks forgiveness, his power. And hidden behind a closet, Kiko was introduced to what seemed like two decomposing heads, with this thick liquid coming from their eyes, nose, and mouth, decorated with candles and dead animals. It was like a makeshift altar. It is true that Chizumi's parents were very strict, but thanks to Yuma's power, their brains got liquefied. And that was when Kiko would be overwhelmed with fear, screaming in sheer terror as she ran out of the apartment, leaving behind a demonic child, laughing hysterically. It took a while, until Kiko was able to convince herself that she was a victim to a prank. Those were not real decapitated heads. They couldn't be. They were stage props, that's all it was. Smoke and mirrors set up by a malicious child. To think that there was even a slight moment where Kiko was buying into the idea of Yuma being a Satanist, who was given a power from the apology demon. But aside from the horrible experience with the demonic child, that night, Kiko began noticing something strange with their parents. They've not only caught themselves a terrible flu or something, but was so congested, drowsy, disorientated, that they didn't realize that they were serving dinner with nothing but silverware and empty dishes. And as Kiko's parents was barely responsive to their surroundings, resulting with Kiko losing her appetite when seeing her parents sneezing all over the empty dinnerware. It seems like Kiko herself had also caught the flu, when feeling the thin mucus escaping her nose after letting out a small sneeze. To think that this whole time we are witnessing a story of a girl's fascination with a troubled boy. I bet some of us were hoping that our young and beautiful Kiko would reach out to this boy and his twisted sister, hopefully rewarding us with a story that would give its warm ending, or something like that. Too bad that our expectations are nothing but a mere fantasy, successfully blinding us to the true horrors waiting within the shadows, and evil just waiting for the right moment to give us a reality check when making itself known, to bless us with a truly authentic horror story. It is ignorance that has us believing that this is a story of a young man who has an unhealthy need to be forgiven, hounded by a malicious problem child, Kiko, a kind-hearted girl who's toying us with the attempt of making this into a love story when in reality it is being soured by a massive outbreak. For some reason, Kiko and everybody at school had caught the flu. Their heads were feeling heavy, giving off the feeling of disorientation. Some of the students were even acting weird, as if they lost the ability of rational thinking. Ignorance, my friends, will always be horror's greatest advantage. Because later that day, when Kiko would stumble upon Sanda and his gang tormenting Yuma, having enough of the bullying and Yuma's pitiful display of apologizing, that was when our kind-hearted girl would finally be introduced to the reality of the story. The horror that has been lingering in the shadows. Greeting Kiko when Sandra and his gang responded to her demands. Their eyes, nose, even mouth pouring out this thick, yellowish red liquid. And as they tried stumbling towards Kiko, their efforts of maintaining stability were hopeless, collapsing to the floor like dead bodies, going splat when their liquefied innards poured from their heads, possibly giving a twitch of life before succumbing to this terrible fate. And that was when Kiko would be reunited with her friend Chizumi. Brains. All thanks to her brother, there is tasty, sweet, delicious brains everywhere, just waiting to be consumed, to be licked up. You see, when Yuma started seeking forgiveness, that's when his connection with the demon is activated. The brains start dissolving. Something that even Kiko should be experiencing herself. That terrible flu, the thin mucus trickling down from her nose, that bizarre taste in the back end of her mouth, that's her brain being dissolved, just waiting to be consumed by Chizumi. And when Yuma tried defending his actions, pleading for Kiko to disregard his sister's vile lies as she begins to feast upon the melted puddle of flesh and human innards, seeking forgiveness for his sister's horrid behavior, giving Kiko another one of his stories, it's because of how their parents had died in an accident. Their brains had melted, and Chizumi changed when tasting their liquefied remains. Trying to reach out to Kiko, seeking forgiveness to the foolish girl, who had enough brains left to finally realize the danger she was in, and begin running for her life, and running through the hallways desperately trying to seek help. searching the classrooms, the offices, anywhere within the school that would have signs of life. Kiko would realize that she was the only one within the school who was still alive, because everyone else within the school had their brains, insides, pouring from their skulls. And when hearing the sounds of apologies being screamed through the hallways, Yuma running after Kiko, desperately trying to seek forgiveness from the petrified girl, Kiko's efforts of escaping Yuma had resulted with her tripping over a dead body. And with Yuma running towards Kiko with his frantic apologies, finally witnessing the monster that was hidden within the shadows, the demon that lurked over Yuma's shoulder. That was when Kiko had succumbed to her injuries and fainted. Well, my friends, even though Kiko survived the incident, I wouldn't say that it was something of a happy ending. As of now, she spends her days in intensive care because of how some of her brain had dissolved. According to the doctors, it's a miracle that she survived. Unfortunately, she'll never be the same again. The incident at the school had definitely made headlines. Kiko, the sole survivor of a deadly outbreak that killed every student, teacher, and staff within that school. A lot of people wanting to know what happened. And even though Kiko had a hard time explaining her story, for obvious reasons, there was only two things she made very clear: that this was an attack from a pair of siblings, and that she will never, ever accept another apology again. Since the incident, Yuma and his sister Chizumi were nowhere to be found. Two suspects who were still at large, and Kiko knew that this was only the beginning of something truly terrifying. Ladies and gentlemen, weeks ago I have shared a unique perspective into the world of grim fairy tales by introducing a collection of art submitted by various individuals. But before we begin to introduce a unique fairy tale that stood out for so many, I would like to give my humble appreciation and gratitude to all those who have participated and worked with me on crafting this friendly community competition that I set up. You see, I have a deep admiration for artists, creators who dream with their eyes wide open, dreamers who I find to be inspirational and admirable. Men and women who successfully share their imagination to the open world. I even have a love for those who present their deepest, most darkest nightmares. Oh yes, I do love the nightmares that were offered for the third horror show gallery. The twisted, the macabre, and even the disturbing. Oh yes, I love it. Anyways, amongst the collection of submitted pieces, there was a piece of eye candy that has quite the story behind it. For one artist who participated within the gallery, he believes horror isn't concrete nor specific. The horror should remain in mystery without having every detail explained. As humans, we fear the unknown, the mystery that remains within the abyss, and knowing what lurks within the darkness does take away the fear, dilutes horror in its purest form. For many of us may contradict the enjoyment we crave when experiencing the beautiful world of terror. Today, we are about to look into a horror that has captured the interest of many. The winner of my gallery, who decided to accept my challenge by reimagining the popular tale Hansel and Gretel, a tale of two kids who entered a large house for the fancy of sweets and spoils, only to find themselves trapped within this sweet nightmare. Except our winner decided to create an abstract house, a symbol of a larger house, but something that could be found on a Christmas table, a scene that gave the inner comforts of cookies, cream, and candy, everything sweet and warming, until the true horror is exposed when getting a glimpse inside this small house, thus making this candy floss piece unright. The insides of this gingerbread house, revealing the skeletal remains of Siamese twins, thus twisting this colorful scene of joy and happiness with a grisly secret. a shocking representation of greed. Is it not true that it was the inner greed of Hansel and Gretel that brought them into the gingerbread house? The thoughts of lining their stomachs with sweets and spoils while ignoring the reality that they were within a place that they didn't belong. A picture of a world with its bright and magnificent color, thus giving a welcoming experience, until the adorable looking mice would reveal the nightmare hidden within a tasty scene, something that's unexpected. Something that raises more questions than giving answers. Something that sparks our imagination on wanting to know the terrible story behind this picture. Giving a horror that isn't fully explained, but succeeds on terrifying us as we try to understand what it is, what we are truly looking at, and knowing that our human imagination can't deny the fact that we are looking at a terrible, nightmarish horror story. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to announce the winner of the third horror show gallery. Number 10, Hansel and Gretel by Kevin the Radio Guy, otherwise known as Valentine. You'll find all the links to his websites and profiles in the description below. Until next time, my friends, thank you for watching the show, and a special thanks to those who've joined the horror show gallery.